Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip quietly through the splintered doorways and damp stone corridors of medieval Europe. The torchlight is dim, the floors are creaking, and something cold lingers in the air more than just the draft. You're walking barefoot on rush-covered planks soaked in centuries of, well, things best left unnamed. Behind each heavy wooden door, beneath every canopy bed, lie secrets, dark ones. Not just of passion or politics, but of foul habits, filthy arrangements, cruel customs, and the kinds of nocturnal routines that make you really appreciate your mattress and hot shower. You might think candlelit castles and royal bedrooms were dripping with luxury, but tonight you'll discover the medieval bedroom was a battlefield of superstition, disease, rank smells, and disturbingly little privacy. And as we settle in, you'll begin to realize this might just be the most disgusting, haunting bedtime story you've ever heard. You probably won't survive this one, with your idealized vision of chivalry and romance intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy in the world, let me know your location and local time down below in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a peasant's hut in 12th century Normandy. It's late. The smoke from the hearth hasn't quite cleared. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof, and the air feels thick, like someone's been cooking cabbage and wet leather for a week straight. You duck your head under a low beam, your hair grazing cobwebs, and glance around. The bedroom is just the farthest corner of the one-room hut, cordoned off by a few threadbare linens hanging from ropes. The bed, a wooden frame packed with straw layered with coarse wool and crawling with life. Not metaphorically crawling, by the way. Lice, fleas, and bed bugs are routine companions whether you're a poor farmer or the Queen of England. The straw is rarely changed, and beneath it the floor is layered with old rushes meant to absorb spills bodily or otherwise. The word rush sounds poetic, doesn't it? But these were not clean. No one swept the floor before adding a new layer. Animal droppings, spoiled food, vomit, all just mashed deeper with each addition. You don't clean, you cover, and there are no pajamas. You sleep in your clothes or naked if you're alone and brave. In winter, people huddle like animals wrapped in wool furs or each other. Whole families, sometimes strangers, packed together to share body heat. In fact, the idea of the private bedroom is almost non-existent. Privacy. That's a modern indulgence. In most of medieval Europe, if someone's sleeping, someone else is watching. You want to toss and turn, wrestle with your itchy wool blanket, pass wind loudly in the night. Sorry your mother-in-law is right beside you, chewing on a turnip. Now imagine the manor house. You climb into the great bed of a local noble, massive, carved, impressive, and completely exposed. It sits in the hall, not tucked away in a separate room. People come and go, servants tend the fire. A steward might sleep on the floor nearby. And that's before we even get to the issue of chamber pots. Most people relieve themselves indoors at night, especially in winter. That sound in the corner, Sean, not a ghost. Just someone urinating in a ceramic bowl 5 feet from your head. And yet this is still the better sleeping arrangement compared to what the guards or laborers get: cold floors, moldy hay, or if lucky, a shared sack stuffed with feathers that haven't been changed since the last plague. Let's talk about sex, shall we? You're not alone. Sex in medieval bedrooms, when it happens, is rarely private. Curtains, if you're lucky enough to have them, are more symbolic than soundproof. In peasant homes, your children are right there. In royal palaces, your attendants might be standing watch. One medieval French noblewoman wrote that her bed was never free of eyes and ears and giggling. People knew what you were doing, and they commented on it. And that's if the act was consensual. The truth is darker. Marriage wasn't always about love. It was political, strategic, economical. A girl might be 12, married, moved in, and expected to perform her wifely duties in a bed she shares with a man 3 times her age. If she refused, that wasn't just a personal matter, it could be considered theft. Her virginity belonged to her husband now, and consummation was legal proof of a marriage's validity. Want to document your first night as husband and wife? No problem, just invite witnesses. This wasn't uncommon. People would literally stand outside your bedchamber and wait for the groans or giggles or screams. Sometimes they'd even lift the sheets after to check for blood. A horrifying fusion of public ritual and private trauma. Then there's the church. The bedroom was not a free zone. Catholic doctrine laid out exactly how and when sex was allowed. No intercourse on feast days, Sundays, Fridays, Lent, or while the woman was menstruating, pregnant, or breastfeeding. The acceptable position. Only one. Anything else sin. People feared dying mid-act, their souls trapped in damnation for eternity because they dared turn sideways. And yet despite all this control, affairs were everywhere. Nobles had mistresses, kings had entire households of unofficial wives. Monks and nuns broke celibacy vows so frequently that some orders started building separate sleeping cells to prevent temptation. Didn't help. The darkness was only as faithful as the people inside it. But even without sex, the bed was no sanctuary. Think of disease. You might share your bed with a plague-infected family member, or a leper if you're showing Christian charity, or someone who has just come in from a battlefield, lice in every seam. People bled in bed. They gave birth in bed. They died in bed. And that bed wasn't burned or cleaned. The sheets were brushed off. The mattress flipped. Next sleeper, please. And the dreams, oh, the dreams. People believed sleep was vulnerable, that demons entered through the mouth or sat on your chest as you dozed. The infamous succubus was said to visit men in the night, seduce them, and drain their life. The incubus preyed on women. Nightmares weren't just dreams. They were evidence of sin. If you woke up sweaty and gasping, it wasn't night terrors, it was spiritual failure. You roll over in your medieval bed, and your eyes adjust to the dark. A crucifix hangs crookedly above you, tilted from the damp stone shifting beneath the walls. You hear snoring, a rat's tiny claws tapping across the rafters, someone moaning from fever. You pull the coarse blanket tighter, itchy from unwashed wool, heavy with the weight of silence. And just when you think it couldn't get worse, you smell it. That faint, sour, sweet scent. The bed was shared last night, and the chamber pot wasn't emptied. You close your eyes tighter. Try to imagine a forest, a stream, anything. But instead, your mind drifts to what you heard earlier, the story of the boy who died of suffocation after sleeping beneath heavy bedding during a fevered night. Or the rumor that witches visit sleeping children, tie invisible knots in their hair, and steal their breath. You shift again, careful not to disturb the rat's nest near your feet. It's not your home after all. You're just a guest in the middle of the darkest century in European history. And the night is long. You try to steady your breathing, hoping the sounds outside the bed curtains, if you're lucky enough to have them, aren't what you think they are. A thud. Then soft footsteps. Someone walking barefoot over damp straw. Maybe it's just a servant returning from the chamber. or maybe it's something older. You're not sure which would be worse. You lie still and you start to wonder what exactly lies beneath this house. The medieval home wasn't built with insulation or ventilation in mind. Cold air rises through the floorboards, and so do the smells of the cellar. If you're in a peasant cottage, that might mean preserved meats and root vegetables. But if you're in a city, it means rot, human waste, vermin. And above, there's no respite either. Thatch roofing is common, lightweight, cheap, and breathable, but also home to insects, birds, and sometimes snakes. They fall through cracks or nesting holes during the night, landing silently beside you. There's even an old superstition that to sleep with your mouth open is to invite a spider or a spirit, or both, to take up residence. You're beginning to understand that in medieval Europe, the bedroom was a crossroads, a place where life, death, myth, biology, and sin all mingled beneath heavy quilts and smoky rafters. Even the materials used in a bed reveal darker truths. Mattresses weren't filled with clouds. They were stuffed with straw hay moss, or feathers plucked from fowl that may or may not have been cleaned. And over time, that stuffing became an ecosystem. Bugs, mildew, sometimes mold. You didn't replace your mattress, you patched it. Maybe restuffed it with some old rags or wool clumps someone bartered for at the market. And for those slightly wealthier down pillows and feather beds seemed luxurious until you remembered that feathers were expensive. Often they were scavenged from old pillows, second-hand or even stolen. Poor families might try to imitate wealth by plucking the feathers from pigeons or crows. These carried lice and mites, and if they weren't dried properly, they reeked of decay. Of course, not everyone had a bed. Let's visit the monastery. The brothers sleep in long rows, silent as tombs, each man in his own narrow cell, cloaked in wool, lying atop wooden planks. Softness breeds sin, they believe. A bed that comforts also tempts. So they make themselves uncomfortable on purpose. If they wake in the night, pangs of guilt. Impure thoughts, they rise and pray. Some monks whipped themselves before bed, hoping to bleed out their desires and drift into unconsciousness with a clean soul. In some stricter orders, monks slept sitting upright, legs folded backs against the wall. Lying down was too indulgent. Others used stone pillows carved into a rounded dome so they could lay their heads down without succumbing to real rest. Sleep was a necessary evil, but comfort, a gateway to damnation. Now cross the monastery walls and step into a noblewoman's chamber. This is a room of contradictions. Silks and gold thread line the canopy, but beneath the finery lies the same straw and linen as in every other bed. There are perfumes here, true, but they exist to mask not just body odor, but the stench of illness. Many women of the court used dried lavender or rosemary under their pillows to fight infection. Not because it cured anything, but because it made them feel less helpless. In fact, the noble bedroom was a theater of illusion. Visitors were shown a pristine space, the tapestries, the carved bedposts, the ivory combs laid out just so. But at night, those same tapestries trapped damp air and harbored moths. The combs pulled lice from greasy hair, and the bed itself, it might have been slept in by more than one person the night before, sisters, cousins, visiting guests. Wealth didn't mean privacy. It just meant more people wanted your space. Then there's the wet nurse. Nobles rarely breastfed their own children. Instead, they hired poorer women to live with them, sleep nearby, and feed their babies. These women were expected to be available at all hours. And so the lady of the house would often hear the sound of her child feeding in the dark, even as she lay cold and untouched. beside her indifferent husband. The intimacy of motherhood outsourced. You may wonder, did anyone enjoy sleep? Some did. The seasonal rhythms of medieval life meant that in winter, sleep stretched into two phases: first sleep and second sleep. You'd drift off after dusk, wake sometime around midnight, stay up for an hour or two, praying, thinking, or visiting a neighbor, and then return to bed until dawn. It was accepted, even natural, but only if your life allowed it. If you were a servant, there was no such luxury. The bell might call you before sunrise. Your job could be to rekindle fires, fetch water, clean soiled linens, or brush down your master's boots. And by brush down, of course, we mean scrape mud, feces, and God knows what off with a dull knife. But there's one group whose bedroom lives were even darker, literally. Let's go to the castle dungeon. You're not a noble. You're a prisoner. You've offended the crown. Or maybe you just owed someone money. Your bed. A patch of damp stone. If you're lucky, some straw. But even that molds quickly in the subterranean wet. There's no fire, no blanket. Rats come near for warmth and sometimes nibble on your toes. You curl up, arms around your knees, teeth chattering. Some prisoners were forgotten entirely. There are records of men locked in towers for so long that they forgot how to speak. Their dreams, if they had them, were filled with flickering torchlight, echoes of iron doors, the stench of waste, and the sound of screaming from other cells. But it's not just dungeons where darkness fell hard. Even average townhouses in London or Bruges had their dangers. You climb into bed beside your husband, or the man assigned to be your husband. He reeks of ale and sweat. You turn your head. He doesn't ask. Marital rape wasn't a crime. Your pain is not discussed. You endure it. You pray. You cry silently into a pillow that smells of ashes and sheep's wool. And then you notice the fleas again. You wake up scratching. You scratch so hard you bleed. Later that wound festers. Someone whispers the word plague, even though it's just an infection. You're given no balm, no care. The bed becomes a sick bed, then a deathbed, and then it's reused. Beds weren't just for sleeping. They were for birth, for injury, for fever, for recovery, for sex, for secrets, for death. They were the stage on which nearly all medieval human drama was performed. And yet, they were the most contaminated places in the entire house. Even the idea of who shared your bed gets stranger. Hospitality laws meant travelers were often invited into homes, and sometimes into beds, by total strangers. Bed sharing wasn't necessarily sexual, it was economical. 2 men, 3 men, even 5 or 6 children to a mattress. In winter, everyone piled in. Naked skin against naked skin. A mix of necessity and trust. But sometimes it went wrong. There are court records from England where men accused of theft claimed they only robbed their bedmates after waking up and realizing the man beside them had died in his sleep. They'd been spooning a corpse for hours and thought, well, might as well take the coin pouch. You lie still now, imagining the weight of medieval blankets. They were made of heavy woven wool, thick, scratchy, suffocating. Some households layered multiple coverings, so much so that you could hardly move. Good for winter, terrible for breathing. There were no light linens, no cotton sheets. Only the suffocating embrace of cloth and the chill of air that never really warmed. And yet, people dreamed here. Children were conceived stories, whispered hands held in the dark. Even in the stink and the sickness, people still hoped. Hoped for a better night, a longer sleep, a warmer dream, and that hope, that's where we'll pick up next. You wake up if you ever really slept. The light leaking in through the cracks isn't sunlight. It's more like a vague gray smudge in the air. Morning in medieval Europe doesn't begin with a stretch and a yawn. It begins with a cough, the clatter of someone already stirring porridge by the hearth, and the muffled groan of sore limbs emerging from cramped sleep. Your back aches from the hard mattress or lack of one. You reach to scratch a spot behind your knee and find yet again the tiny sting of a flea bite. You're not surprised. The night creatures have done their work. You brush away a beetle that has wandered onto your blanket and try not to think about what's lurking in the rushes under your bed. It's time to rise. Except that beds weren't just for sleeping, they were places of business too. Not the kind with ledgers and quills, but a different kind of transaction. In noble households, important meetings, secret deals, and hushed conversations all took place atop the bed. Imagine sitting beside your liege lady while she lounges in a linen shift, her hair pinned up servants at attention. You're discussing politics, but you're sitting on the same cushion where she delivered her last child. It's intimate, awkward, and entirely normal. The bed as a space for diplomacy, it seems absurd now, doesn't it? But for queens, it was their version of court. When Elizabeth of York or Isabella of France held council, they often did so from a half-reclined position, surrounded by ladies-in-waiting tapestries, fluttering incense burning not for ambiance but to cover the smell of illness or sweat. Visitors bowed, kissed the covers, and made their petitions. And that same bed, later that night, it might host the king, or a lover, or a midwife, or all three if the timing was unfortunate enough. You find yourself traveling now across borders and centuries. In Germany, we visit a merchant's townhouse in the late 1300s. Here, too, the bedroom is public. The bed itself is a work of carpentry, thick oak high legs, and an enormous canopy to trap heat. Carvings of biblical scenes run along the headboard, as if to remind the sleeper to behave even in dreams. But it doesn't work. The man of the house shares his bed not just with his wife, but sometimes with apprentices, traveling clerks, even paying guests. Renting space in your bed wasn't shameful, it was smart. Pillows were shared, blankets were layered, and everyone faced the wall to avoid awkward eye contact. There were rules: no touching, no talking, no moving more than necessary. Still, things happened. Bodies moved in sleep. Breathing became synchronized. Accidental brushes turned into furtive whispers. And when it went wrong, scandal. One merchant's diary described waking to find his apprentice missing. He'd snuck away in the night after groping the master's wife. The apprentice was found later murdered in an alley, clutching a torn scrap of the lady's linen sleeve. No one was punished. The body was buried, the sheets were burned, and the bed was repopulated that same night. Now let's turn to the clergy. You'd think men and women who took vows of chastity would avoid the bedroom altogether. But even here, the stories are twisted. There's Brother Tomas, a Dominican in southern France, who was discovered after he started sleep-talking, confessing dreams of flesh and warmth in front of his entire dormitory. His abbot ordered him to fast and sleep without blankets for 40 nights. He nearly froze. Still, the dreams didn't stop. And Sister Margareta, cloistered in York, who complained of nightly visitations from demons that pressed her down and made her gasp like a fish pulled from the stream. The confessor suggested it might be impure thoughts disguised as devils. So she was moved to a cell with no bed at all, just straw and a block of wood. She died within a month, officially of fever, unofficially of suffocating loneliness. Sexual repression twisted itself into the mattress like a worm. Monks who faltered were punished with silent starvation or exile. Nuns who fell pregnant were either hidden away until they gave birth or quietly disappeared. In some places, babies born within convent walls were thrown into nearby streams. Others were sent to orphanages with notes pinned to their swaddling cloth, "I am not sin. I am only hunger." But perhaps most eerie are the accounts from plague years. Close your eyes. It's 1348. You're in Florence. The city is choking with death. People are afraid to touch each other. Doctors walk with masks shaped like beaks filled with herbs to ward off the miasma. The bedroom becomes a tomb. Entire families lock themselves indoors, convinced that fresh air is death. They sleep in shifts, terrified of falling asleep and never waking up. One noblewoman demands that her bed linens be changed every 3 hours, believing that it will keep the sickness from soaking into her skin. She dies on the 4th day. Her maids follow, shortly after infected by the cloth they handled. Others take more drastic measures. Some burn their bedding in great public fires. Whole neighborhoods stink of wool and feathers and panic. But the poorest, they do nothing. They sleep as they always have on straw beside pigs under threadbare cloaks. And they live. Not all, but many. The irony doesn't go unnoticed. One monk writes, "The lowly were spared by their filth, and the Lord smothered by their silks." You shiver at the thought. Now imagine childbirth. In the medieval world, giving birth was not a miracle, it was a gamble. Women went into labor knowing they might not come out. Beds were the battleground. Sheets were soaked pillows, bitten saints' relics clutched until fingers bled. And after, the bed was not cleaned. A servant might flip the mattress dry the blood-stained sheets in the sun and place them back in use. Babies died often, mothers more so. Some households kept a special corner of the room designated for birth and death. It was the same space. You begin to feel that maybe the medieval bedroom wasn't a place of rest at all. It was a revolving door for life's messiest moments, and so people turned to charms. In France, women tucked bits of parchment under their pillows with prayers to Saint Margaret, protector of childbirth. In Scotland, men hung sprigs of rowan above their beds to ward off night spirits. In Hungary, families sprinkled holy water on the mattress before sleep. And everywhere across every kingdom, there was the whisper of fear. Because if you weren't scared of lice or plague or suffocation, you were scared of what came in dreams. The old woman who sits on your chest. The dead child who calls your name. The black dog in the doorway. People locked their bedroom doors not against thieves, but against things that moved without flesh. And still, people slept. Because they had to. Because in between the misery, there were small comforts. A warm patch of fur from the dog who curled beside your legs. The lull of rain against the thatch. The sleepy murmur of someone you loved breathing beside you. Even in this squalor, there were moments of peace. You take one last look at the room before night falls again. You see the bed, the stains, the candle guttering low. And for just a second, you imagine how this very bed might outlive the person in it. Might witness births, betrayals, fevers, and deaths all on the same linen. The candle has burned down to a stub, the wick hissing as melted tallow pools around it. You can feel the air shift, the kind of subtle change that says the night has returned. You're still in the medieval bedroom, but the house feels different now. It always does after dusk. Shadows crawl along the walls like liquid, and the bed creaks with every breath you take. Not because of ghosts, though plenty believed in those, but because the medieval bed was a living thing. It groaned. It shifted. It remembered. Beneath that lumpy mattress, stuffed with straw feathers or even heather, if you were lucky, was a frame held together by ropes. And those ropes had to be tightened regularly, hence the phrase you know well, sleep tight. If you don't tighten them, your back bows like a harp string, and you wake feeling older than the village priest. The ropes sag, the frame squeaks, and the straw pokes through the ticking, jabbing your ribs, like the ghost of last winter's harvest. Still, it's yours. Your spot. Maybe your only one. And that's no small thing. See, in the medieval world, bed rights were sacred. Not in a romantic sense, but legally, socially, even economically. Beds were passed down through generations. They were written into wills, traded in dowries, and used as collateral. Owning a bed meant you had something of value, something worth stealing, fighting over, or coveting. Some people spent their whole lives without a real bed, just piles of sacks and woven mats in communal corners. To lie on a raised frame with sheets, even scratchy wool ones, was a sign that you'd made it. A little. But beds weren't always peaceful spaces. In many cases, they were battlegrounds in disputes, especially in marriages. Picture this, a husband and wife arguing over dowry rights, children property. The resolution. Sometimes they were forced to remain in bed together while the matter was arbitrated. Not metaphorically, physically. Tied to the same bedpost with a single blanket between them until they came to terms. And yes, there are records of deaths, strangulation, suffocation. Some resolutions never came. Then there's the curious case of the couvade. In parts of medieval France, Spain, and even rural England, it was believed that when a woman gave birth, the husband should also take to bed. He would lie beside the fire, groaning theatrically, accepting visitors who brought gifts and sympathy, as if he were the one recovering from childbirth. Some say it was a way to ward off evil spirits, to confuse them into attacking the man, instead of the vulnerable newborn. Others think it was simply an excuse for lazy husbands to demand soup. Either way, it speaks to how the bed, this tiny square of woven rope and linen, was a portal. Not just for sleep, but for ritual, for drama, for fear. In the wealthier estates, it became a stage. Let's go now to a royal court. You're a chamberlain, just outside the Queen's private chambers. The room smells of rose oil and warmed milk. You step carefully across the polished boards, past the perfumed brazier, and draw aside the velvet curtain. The Queen is not alone. Attendants are everywhere. One braids her hair, another rubs her feet with balm. A third prepares her nightcap, which isn't a hat, but a mug of warm wine with spices and a bit of egg. It helps her sleep, they say. Behind her, a priest murmurs evening prayers. Everyone keeps their eyes lowered, and yet, no one leaves. This is the coucher, the ritual of putting the Queen to bed. A performance, really. Symbolic. She may not even go to sleep immediately. But the act of being put to bed, dressed in nightclothes by other hands tucked beneath embroidered sheets, it is a reminder of status, of sacred femininity, of vulnerability carefully choreographed. For the king, it was similar, though his coucher might end with company. A mistress, a page, a musician, He might fall asleep to the sound of lute strings or political flattery whispered like a lullaby. In either case, the bed was never truly private. Not in palaces, not in power. Which brings us to the idea of night visitors, not lovers or servants, but something else. The medieval mind was deeply steeped in fear. Sleep was not passive rest, it was dangerous surrender. You let go of your senses. You drifted into a realm where demons and saints both had access to your soul. If you dreamt of fire, it could mean hell was sniffing around your spirit. If you dreamt of a man in black, it might be the devil in disguise. Dreams were read like omens, examined, feared, prayed over. Some people even slept with relics beneath their pillows, fingers of saints, pieces of cloth supposedly touched by martyrs, holy beads, all to keep evil at bay. There are stories of women who refused to sleep lying down at all, choosing instead to rest upright in chairs, claiming that as long as they sat, the devil could not pull them into his kingdom. These women were usually dismissed as mad, until they died in their sleep anyway. Then the town whispered that maybe they were right to be afraid. In German folklore, there was the Alp, a malevolent spirit who would sit on your chest, steal your breath, and leave you gasping awake. In Scandinavia, the Mar, a pale, ghastly woman rode you like a horse through your dreams, leaving your limbs numb and your soul hollow. Sound familiar? These were early explanations for sleep paralysis. But in the medieval bedroom, it wasn't a quirk of neurology. It was real, and it was your fault. Had you sinned that day? Had you spoken against the church? Had you glanced too long at a widow's ankles? If yes, then the punishment would come. In the night. In your bed. And still you'd wake up. Scratch your bites. Stretch your stiff back. Say your morning prayers. And do it all again. Now let's peek inside the bedroom of the village healer. She sleeps alone. Always has. Her bed is draped with herbs, lavender, thyme, sage. Not for beauty, but for power. Some believe she speaks to spirits, that her dreams tell the future. No one visits her at night. Not because they're afraid for her, because they're afraid of her. She keeps her bed raised on stones to keep it off the cold earth. A small cauldron simmers nearby. She says it's for warming compresses. Others say she brews curses in it while half asleep. The children say she floats at night, that she doesn't touch her mattress, that she lies there, eyes wide open, waiting for sinners to pass by her window. And yet, they all come to her when illness strikes. She lays hands on foreheads. She whispers into ears. She tucks feverish limbs into sheets that smell like summer. Her bed sees more death than the village church. And now so do you. Because by now you've learned something essential. In the medieval world, the bed was not just a place to dream. It was a place to bleed, to bargain, to confess, to give up, to hold on, to disappear. And the longer you lie there, the more you feel it, how many lives this one piece of furniture has held. How many secrets it's soaked up in blood and sweat and whispers. The bed does not forget, nor do you. But for now, you pull the blanket higher. Let your limbs go limp, and let your mind drift again into the shadows of history toward another night, another secret, another breath in the dark. The stillness of the night deepens. You hear it in the way the floorboards stop creaking. You feel it in the way the air cools heavier, pressing closer. In this silence, the medieval bedroom becomes something else entirely. A confession chamber, a last refuge, a prison, all at once. You're lying beside someone now, maybe your spouse or a stranger or your child. The medieval bed was rarely solitary, and who you slept beside said everything about who you were, your social class, your reputation, your shame, your status. A noble child might sleep with a servant, not out of affection, but to have someone nearby to fetch water, chase off rats, or whisper prayers. A peasant child might sleep beside a sibling or grandparent just to survive the winter's cold. But there's a moment just before sleep fully takes hold, when people speak the truth. Words whispered in the dark. A confession not meant for ears, yet always overheard. These fragile murmurs were precious currency in medieval society. Secrets passed from mouth to pillow to wall, and beds soaked up not only sweat and sickness, but stories. Take, for example, the bed of justice, not a metaphor. In France, under the Ancien Régime, the king would sometimes convene court from his bed. Lying back against fine linens propped up by brocade pillows, he would hear grievances, pass judgment, and make declarations. All from within the draped confines of a chamber where his mistresses might still be hiding behind the curtain. To be summoned to the king's bedside was both an honor and a threat. It meant power, but it also meant exposure. The intimacy of it disarmed you. You bowed lower, spoke softer. You didn't argue with a man in bed, even if he held your future in his hands. And sometimes people were sentenced to death from between those same sheets. But justice wasn't reserved for kings. In many rural villages, local disputes, land marriage betrayal, were handled domestically, and the place where the final confrontation happened, the bed. If a wife accused her husband of impotence or abuse, the elders might visit and question him in bed. If a neighbor suspected adultery, she might spy through bedchamber cracks, waiting to catch a glimpse of movement under covers not meant to be shared. The bed saw more law than the courthouse, and the punishments came quicker. A marriage dissolved in a bedroom might never be recorded, but it could be enforced with exile shaming, or a midnight torchlit march through the village with nothing but bedsheets to cover your disgrace. You shift in your imagined straw mattress, imagining what it would be like to lose everything because of what someone claimed they saw, just a shadow moving on the other side of a drape. Even now, centuries later, your heart tightens. Let's turn now to beds of the dying. Death came quickly in the medieval world, and often in bed. But the process wasn't private. Far from it. A good Christian death meant witnesses. Family gathered close. Priests hovered. Children were brought in, yes, even the youngest, to see death firsthand, to learn what awaited them. Candles were lit, not just for light, but to guide the soul. Holy water was sprinkled on pillows, not out of comfort, but to ward off demons ready to steal the departing breath and the dying person. They were expected to perform, to repent, to forgive, to name heirs, speak blessings, accept their fate. Even if they were delirious, feverish, barely coherent, the deathbed had rules. You could not simply die. You had to die properly. But what if you didn't? There were whispers of those who died badly, eyes wide open, clutching the mattress, moaning instead of praying. Those beds became cursed. No one wanted to sleep in them after. They were moved to barns, to sheds, sometimes chopped up and burned. It was said that a deathbed that hadn't been blessed might summon the soul back again and again every time someone else tried to sleep. Others, especially women who died in childbirth, were said to return at night, to reclaim the life stolen too soon. Midwives told stories of stillborn cries in empty bedrooms, of beds that rocked by themselves, of sheets that curled at the edges like they were being gripped from beneath. And then there were the relic beds. In certain churches, special beds were kept behind the altar, worn wooden frames, sometimes lined with velvet, believed to have miraculous powers. The sick were laid upon them in hopes of healing. The infertile hoped for children. The mad were restrained there waiting for divine clarity. But they didn't always leave cured. Some began to speak in tongues. Others screamed for days, clutching at the bedposts until their nails tore. In the eyes of the faithful, this was proof that the demon was being exorcised. But in quieter corners, whispers spread maybe the bed itself was cursed. Maybe it didn't drive out spirits, it kept them. And people still lined up to lie on it. Hope outweighed fear. Now return to the peasant's home. It's spring. The rains have come and the roof leaks steadily. You place buckets at the corners of the bed to catch the drip. You sleep curled away from the wet patches. The room smells of mildew and ash. The baby is sick, feverish. You hold them to your chest, trying to share your body heat. There's no doctor, no medicine, just faith, and herbs tied to the bedpost, and a song hummed quietly in the dark. The baby doesn't wake in the morning. You don't scream. There's no energy left for that. You wrap the child in linen, and you sleep on that same bed the next night. Because you must. Because there is nowhere else. But the bed remembers. You feel it, don't you, that weight? The imprint of absence. It never really fades. And so beds became symbols in literature, in curses, in rituals. To bless a marriage, people scattered rosemary on the sheets. To curse a rival, they placed a hex beneath the mattress. To call a lover back, they burned hair collected from their pillow. Some villagers even made miniature beds of clay, buried them at crossroads, and whispered names into them, hoping to control a person's dreams. The bed was magic. Not the comforting kind, the volatile kind. And so many people died in bed that the church created specific prayers for bedded souls. May the Lord bless this resting place one went and drive out the shadows that linger in linens. It was used not just for the dead, but for anyone who wanted to be sure they'd wake up again. And not everyone did. Sleep was dangerous. There are countless tales of people who went to bed with a headache and never woke. Of entire families who died in their sleep from carbon poisoning or contaminated bread. Of jealous lovers who smothered each other beneath thick quilts and were discovered days later, limbs tangled in a grotesque mockery of affection. And then there are the ghosts. Stories of spectral bedmates were among the most common in medieval Europe. The dead who returned to lie beside the living. Pale wives, lost sons, lovers taken by plague. They whispered regrets. They curled in cold shapes beneath the covers. Some stories say they came seeking warmth. Others say they came to drag you back with them. But not all spirits were malevolent. There are tales of women widowed young who said their husbands visited them at night, not to haunt, just to lie beside them, to hold them, to let them sleep without fear. And maybe that's what the medieval bed offered in the end. Not comfort, not safety, but the hope of connection. The belief that no matter how cold, how damp, how cruel the world became, you were not alone beneath the blankets. Someone had been there before. Someone would be there again. and that somehow was enough. The fire has long gone out now, and the stones of the hearth are cold to the touch. You lie in silence, the only sounds are your breathing, the quiet rustle of the bedding, when you shift slightly, and perhaps a mouse pawing at the crumbs you forgot to sweep away. The medieval night has its own kind of rhythm, not silence exactly, but a pattern of creaks, sighs, the occasional groan of old wood, and your own racing thoughts. This is the hour when people believed the veil between worlds thinned. Midnight was not entertainment time. It was the moment when the night turned serious. And the bed that was your only line of defense. Many people slept with their faces covered not just for warmth, but to keep away spirits. Some even tied cords of holy symbols around their heads. Others recited protective prayers before bed, not once but 3 times, once aloud, once under their breath, and once only in their hearts. Because it wasn't just the dead that visited bedrooms in the night. There was also the living. Burglary was common in medieval towns and villages. Doors were flimsy. Locks were rare. A determined thief could pry open a wooden shutter or slip through a badly built wall with barely a sound. And where would he go first? The bedchamber. That's where the valuables were, what few there were. Coins stitched into pillows, jewelry hidden in a chest beneath the bed. Even the blankets themselves were worth stealing. Some families slept with knives tucked beneath their mattresses, not because they expected to use them, but because they didn't want to be caught helpless. Others took turns staying awake, especially during times of unrest, war, or plague, when looters roamed and soldiers did what they pleased. And if you were a woman alone, you didn't sleep. You watched, because danger came in many forms. Let's step now into the house of a mid-ranking merchant. His wife has been left behind for the month while he travels for trade. She sleeps alone in the marital bed, but not quite. She sleeps with a rosary clutched in one hand, a candle stub burning beside her, and a chair propped against the door. This is not paranoia. This is routine. Women, especially wealthy ones, were targets. There are tales of intruders climbing up walls, slipping through windows, bribing servants. Sometimes it was for theft, sometimes for worse. A woman might be found in the mourning clothing, torn face bruised, memories shattered, and nothing done. If she survived. And what could she say? That she was attacked in bed, that the one place meant to be hers had been taken from her. Some believed that a violated bed carried a stain that couldn't be scrubbed. Those who had the means would burn the sheets and even the bed frame. Those who didn't simply learned to live with the ghosts. But women weren't always the victims. In some places, beds became battlegrounds for power plays between husbands and wives. In law, a wife owed her husband what was called the marital debt, the obligation to provide her body on request. But enforcement of that debt came with consequences. If a man abused it too forcefully, too frequently, too publicly, he might find himself the subject of humiliation rituals. In 14th century France and Flanders, there was a custom called the charivari. If a man was believed to be mistreating his wife in the bedroom, neighbors would gather outside his house at night, banging pots and pans, chanting obscene rhymes, and mocking his manhood. Sometimes they paraded a donkey wearing a dress through the streets to represent his inverted masculinity. It was a form of social justice, loud and unforgiving. The next morning, that man would return to his bed a little less sure of his power. But some men had no such checks. Nobles, lords, kings, they answered to no one. Let's visit a castle now. The hall is quiet, the tapestries still. But in the private bedchamber there is unrest. The Lord has summoned a servant girl. She has no choice. And when it's done, she's sent away with a piece of bread. Maybe a coin, maybe not even that. If she speaks of it, she's dismissed. Or worse, accused of seduction. If she becomes pregnant, she's quietly removed. The child may be raised elsewhere if the Lord is feeling generous. If not, they vanish. This happened in manor after manor, court after court. It was understood, accepted. No one spoke of it above a whisper. But even kings couldn't escape the consequences of their beds. Consider the case of Edward II of England. His bedroom habits became public scandal not for lust, but for love. His close relationship with his favorites, especially Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser, led to open speculation about his sexuality. The nobles whispered, the court mocked, and his queen Isabella seethed. Eventually, those bedroom rumors spilled into politics. Rebellion brewed, betrayals deepened. Edward's lovers were murdered, and he imprisoned, deposed, tortured. And if legend is true, killed by a red-hot poker thrust into his body while he lay restrained in bed. A punishment meant not just to kill, but to mock, to erase his legacy through shame. Even the mighty were vulnerable when they lay down. And what of children? Surely their beds were innocent. Not quite. Children were seen less as individuals and more as extensions of family power. Their beds were often shared with siblings, with tutors, even with strangers. In noble houses, young boys sometimes shared beds with their adult patrons, ostensibly as pages or squires in training. Some of these relationships were benign, others were not. There were whispers of training that went beyond courtly manners, of affection that blurred into control. And always the silence of the bedchamber made it easy to hide. In peasant homes, it was more physical hardship than emotional manipulation. Children slept near animals for warmth. They were used as foot warmers, as pillow substitutes, as living firewood. Their limbs twisted from poor bedding, their sleep broken by the snoring or coughing of the dozen bodies sharing the same space. And yet, they dreamed. In the rare hours when peace held and the fires burned low and steady, children dreamed of castles, of saints, of flying. They whispered stories into each other's ears, fables of witches, who rode goats of saints, who floated above their beds of kings, who could sleep for 100 years and wake to a world reborn. The dreams were always brighter than the waking. And so the bedtime story became a tradition. Not the kind we tell today, but darker, stranger tales. Warnings disguised as fables. Tales of cursed beds that devoured the disobedient. Of children who slept on the Sabbath and never woke again. Of pillows that whispered poison. They weren't told to soothe. They were told to control. Sleep or the witch will come. Lie still, or the wolf under the bed will bite your toes. Don't get out from under the blanket, or the dead will drag you under. You pull the covers tighter even now. Because somewhere deep in the medieval imagination, the bedroom was never truly safe. It was a passageway, a thin place, where dreams touched death. Where love tangled with power, where silence was louder than screams, and through it all the bed stood firm. Wooden, heavy, soaked with centuries. The fire hasn't been relit. The shadows lengthen, and now the chill is creeping into the room again, not the sharp bite of open-air frost, but a dampness that clings to the walls rises from the floorboards and settles in your lungs. You feel it in your bones before you even open your eyes. You're still in the medieval bed under layers that weigh as much as a full-grown hound, and you haven't moved in hours, not because you're well rested, but because it's too cold to shift. The candle is long spent. The hearth is ashes. But your thoughts, those don't sleep. They turn now to the beds that belonged not to nobles or peasants, not even to clergy or kings, but to outcasts, the forgotten people, the feared ones, the ones whose bedrooms weren't part of any house, any court, any family. Let's begin with the leper. In the outermost edge of the village, past the last grazing field, and beyond the line where children are told not to wander, lies a thatched hut. It's smaller than most pig pens. The bed inside is not even a frame. It's a pallet, a spread of moss and rags laid directly onto the ground. The man who sleeps here is covered head to toe, not for warmth, but for shame. He is a leper, and he is alone. Leprosy terrified medieval society not just because of the physical disfigurement, but because of what it symbolized. Punishment. Divine rejection. People believed sin showed itself on the body, and those covered in sores were considered already dead in the eyes of the world. They were issued bells to ring when they approached, not to warn others out of courtesy, but to declare their unworthiness. And yet they too needed sleep. They too had beds made of refuse padded with old straw left behind by farmers. Their bedding was never washed because no one would touch it. Their huts were not cleaned because no one dared enter. In those dark corners, people died forgotten, only the bed left behind to prove they ever lived there at all. Now walk a little further just outside town, where the trees grow thick and the mist hangs low. Here in the tangled woods is another bed, but this one belongs to a woman. She is called many things: witch, wise woman, hag. Her bed is strange, not because of what it lacks, but because of what it holds. Dried herbs hang above the headboard: mugwort, wormwood, poppy seed. Charcoal symbols are scrawled onto the posts. A bone bundle rests near the foot, tied with red thread. There are stains on the linen, not just from blood or water, but from rituals performed in the night. Some say her bed is a portal. Others say she shares it with the devil himself. But no one denies that things happen here. Dreams that reach too far, visions that wake you screaming. Women accused of witchcraft were often judged by what they kept in their bedchambers. If herbs were found beneath the mattress. Cursed. If a child died after sleeping in their arms, possessed. If their bed was too soft, too warm, too empty, too full, it didn't matter. The bed betrayed them. They were dragged from it, and they never returned. And then there were the poor, the truly poor, the wanderers, the beggars. Not everyone in medieval Europe had even the luxury of shared straw or a sack of moss. For them, the concept of a bed was abstract. You slept where you could, under bridges and alleys inside church porches. You rolled yourself in old cloaks and leaned against walls. You curled up near livestock if they let you. And the term bedroll was no metaphor. It was literal, a roll of spare rags tied with a belt and carried everywhere. When you found a place that didn't chase you away, you unrolled it, lay down, and hoped the night wouldn't bring rain or wolves or guards. Children slept like this too. Abandoned or orphaned, they bundled up in graveyards or behind bakehouses. Sometimes the warmth of the ovens was all that stood between them and death. And when morning came, they rolled up their bed, tucked it under one arm, and continued their lives like ghosts with threadbare cloaks. But not all beds were made of poverty. Some were built on punishment. You're in a prison now, a true one. Stone walls, iron bars, cold that bites your skin raw. You're not a criminal, not by our standards. Maybe you stole bread. Maybe you read the wrong book. Maybe you said the wrong prayer in the wrong way. Your bed is a slab, not even hay. Just a shelf carved from the wall. If you're lucky, you get a piece of cloth to curl beneath. If not, you lie in your own filth and try not to scream. The guards don't mind screams. They only respond when the noise stops. Some prisoners were kept like this for years. They began to speak to their beds not out of madness, but because it was the only thing that had ever listened without judgment. The only thing that didn't ask for answers. And when they died, their beds were washed down with vinegar and used again. Clean slate. Now move higher again, out of the dungeons, past the lepers, beyond the forest. Into the gilded chambers of a queen. Let's visit Queen Joan of Navarre, widow of Henry IV. Accused of witchcraft by her stepson Henry V, she was imprisoned. But not in a cell, in her own bedroom. Her royal bed became her cage. She was locked inside her own chambers for years. Her bedding was changed by guards. Her food delivered through narrow doors. And at night, when the wind howled through the high towers and the candles flickered low, she lay awake in royal linens, staring at the same ceiling where she had once dreamt of glory. There was no screaming, only silence. Because sometimes the worst punishment isn't chains or fire, it's isolation inside the place that once made you feel safe. And then there's childbirth. Again. A cycle that never ends. You're in a lying-in chamber now, a room specially prepared for labor. The bed has been blessed. The curtains drawn. The door locked. Only women are allowed inside, midwives, mothers, sisters, healers. The air is thick with steam, herbs, blood, and fear. The woman in the bed is moaning, her fingers clutching the sheets. There is no anesthesia, no surgical team. Just hope and cloth and strong arms. When the child comes, it is silent. The women exchange glances. A prayer is whispered. The mother is told not to look. The baby is taken. And the bed, it absorbs it all. Birth and death just hours apart. And still, every night the bed waits. It waits for the mother who will curl around her living child. For the merchant who will dream of distant shores. For the soldier who will wake screaming. For the nun who will pray with her whole body, hoping her sins melt into the mattress. For the child who whispers stories to the darkness. For you, yes, even you, because now you realize, don't you, that this whole time you haven't just been watching these beds. You've been in them. Not just lying in one room one time, but slipping from bed to bed, dream to dream, century to century, through every secret that a mattress ever held. And the night still isn't over. The wind has shifted. You don't feel it directly. There are no windows here. Not in the way you'd know them, but the air changes like someone opened a door in another century and let a new kind of cold inside. You've passed through death punishment and exile, but tonight you arrive in a very different kind of medieval bed. One made not of wood or straw or filth, but of expectation. You're standing at the foot of a bridal bed. It is enormous. Canopied in deep red, trimmed in fur, decorated with embroidered doves and Latin prayers. The sheets are bleached until nearly white. Rose petals carefully dried are scattered across the surface. A priest has just left the room. A witness remains by the door. This isn't about romance. It's about proof, because tonight this bed must produce evidence, not pleasure, not comfort, not intimacy, just a single red stain on a white sheet. That's what will be held up tomorrow morning above the courtyard, above the crowd, by laughing men and stern-faced women alike. The bride, barely more than a girl, is undressing behind a silk screen. Her groom is older, impatient, instructed. This is not his first time. This is hers. The pressure is unbearable. Not just to perform, but to bleed. If she doesn't, if the sheet remains clean, whispers begin. That she was no virgin, that she was unfaithful, that the marriage was a lie. The bed becomes a courtroom, and she the accused. This wasn't rare. In fact, public bedding ceremonies happened all over medieval Europe. Guests would accompany the newlyweds to their chamber, toss them into bed, sometimes even bind their hands together, and throw sugared nuts or dried fruits on the mattress like confetti. The goal wasn't privacy, it was spectacle. The public had a stake in the marriage, especially if titles or lands or dowries were involved. And that bed, once used for humiliation, would still be the marital bed for decades. Children would be born there. Fevers sweated out. Arguments fought and forgiven beneath its beams, but the memory of the first night never really faded. Now step into another room. Smaller, simpler, but no less important. This is a widow's bed. The linens are darker now, the bedclothes heavier. There are no flowers, no laughter outside the door. Only candle stubs and silence. She lies there alone for the first time in 20 years. Her husband's side is cold, the pillow untouched. His cloak still hangs at the foot of the bed. She hasn't removed it yet. In medieval Europe, widowhood changed everything. A woman might find herself suddenly powerful, free to make decisions, manage property, speak more freely. But in the bedroom, that power looked like absence. Some widows were expected to sleep on the floor for weeks in mourning. Others replaced their bedding with coarse cloth, symbolic of their grief. Some turned their beds into shrines, leaving their husbands' belongings untouched, sleeping beside them as if he might return. Others remarried swiftly, not always by choice. If the dowry was strong and the woman still of childbearing age, she might find herself in another man's bed before the first one's sheets had gone cold. And no one asked what she dreamed about. But let's shift now into a bed that doesn't belong to a person at all. It belongs to a god. In ancient churches and sacred temples, there were ritual beds kept for divine beings. In some Christian convents, symbolic marriage beds were made for Christ himself, nuns laying flowers across the sheets, praying aloud, as if to a lover. These weren't metaphors. The devotion was real, physical, embodied. The bed wasn't just a place of sleep, it became an altar of sacrifice, of yearning, of spiritual ecstasy. But this practice wasn't limited to the sacred. In some villages, marriage beds were used in fertility rituals. An unmarried woman might lie in a bed beneath the statue of a saint hoping for conception, not by a man, but by miracle. Sometimes this was done publicly in the church. Other times it was secret, hidden. Whispers told of girls who became pregnant through dreams or claimed to. The child was called saint-born or spirit-touched. In reality, of course, it was often darker. The result of coercion, of violation, of silence, and the bed always remembered. Then there were the traveling beds, In the courts of Europe, the wealthy didn't sleep in different beds each time they moved between castles or estates. They brought their beds with them. Broken down into pieces, posts, headboards, canopies, these mobile beds were transported by wagon or mule, then reassembled wherever the lord or lady stopped. A bed wasn't just furniture. It was identity. It was home. When Queen Margaret of Anjou traveled from France to England, she brought no fewer than 12 feather mattresses with her, each for a specific stage of the journey. Each one assigned to a different mood, a different ceremony, a different room. And when she reached her new country, her bed was the first thing installed in the palace, before the throne. Because kings ruled by day, but their beds ruled the night. And with beds came bedchambers. We think of a bedroom as private. But in medieval Europe, the bedchamber was a hub. A noble's bedchamber might house secretaries, squires, pages, priests. It was part office, part sanctuary, part gossip center. And in royal courts, even the birth of policy happened in bed. Literally. Ambassadors were received while kings lounged half-dressed against pillows. Alliances were forged with one foot still tangled in the sheets. And sometimes, very often, enemies were conceived before breakfast. But for all its power, the bed was still a place of risk. If a king died in his sleep, who witnessed it? Could the death be concealed? Could a rival seize power before the news broke? That's why some kings appointed bedchamber guards, trusted courtiers, whose only job was to witness the monarch's sleep and waking to monitor his breath, his health, his mood, his pulse. In some cases, those men were the first to betray him. And if a king was murdered in bed, that's where the stories get truly grim. Knives hidden under pillows, poisoned pillows, beds set on fire, curtains drawn tight so the screams wouldn't be heard. There are chronicles of queens smothered with their own bedclothes, of dukes strangled as they slept, the murderer lying beside them until morning to avoid suspicion. The bed became a battlefield. And yet, even in this world of betrayal and ritual and shame, there were moments of gentleness. A mother brushing her child's hair in the moonlight. A servant sneaking an extra blanket to the old master. A widow resting her cheek on the still warm pillow of her departed love. A monk smiling in sleep after a long prayer. A woman singing softly into the belly that grew beneath her nightgown, hoping her child might hear. Even among secrets and stains, the medieval bed held room for softness. But that's how it always is, isn't it? The worst things sleep beside the most human, and the bed as ever holds both. By now, you've stopped expecting peace. Sleep, perhaps. Stillness, certainly. But peace that doesn't belong in a medieval bed. You've traveled through 100 rooms, laid your head on the soft, and the rotten, the perfumed, and the bloodstained. And still the night stretches on. You're in a manor house now. Not a castle, not a hovel, something in between. The kind of home where minor nobility lived, lords too small for history books, too rich for simplicity. Here the bed isn't just furniture, it's status carved into oak. 4 towering posts, thick as tree trunks with heavy curtains to block out light wind and prying eyes. But even this isn't truly private, because tonight you're not alone. There's a servant curled at the foot, sleeping lightly, trained to wake if you stir. On the floor, another bundle of limbs that's your squire half asleep in his boots, a dagger strapped to his thigh. In the corner, a dog rests tail twitching with dreams of chase. You shift, and everyone shifts with you. The bedchamber is alive. This was normal. Wealth didn't mean solitude. Quite the opposite. In noble households, the master's bedroom was a hive of movement. chamberlains preparing the morning robe, ladies in waiting, whispering prayers, stewards delivering reports before sunrise. The idea of waking up alone was foreign. You woke up to a team, and they saw everything. The Lord's late-night cough, the lady's bruises, the missing necklace, the tears after certain visitors left. They watched the bed and learned the family's truths. Now slide lower beneath the blankets. There's something hidden here. A little leather-bound pouch stitched into the hem of the coverlet. You find it by accident. Inside dried herbs. Lavender, betony, mint, and crushed bones. Not perfume. Protection. This is a witch bag tucked by a servant, or perhaps even the lady herself. Not everyone trusted prayers alone. Some needed a spell between the sheets. Witch bags were common, tucked into mattresses sewn beneath pillows hidden behind wall panels, meant to bring fertility, or drive away illness, or make a husband forget his mistress's name. These were not things spoken of aloud, but every household had them. Sometimes even the church used them. Let's move to a bishop's residence. You might expect sanctity here. White linens, clean conscience. But open his mattress, and you'll find something stranger, a scapular stitched into the ticking, a relic pressed into the frame. A small vial of what looks like wine but smells of vinegar and blood. The bishop has nightmares, of judgment, of fire, of things that can't be forgiven even by absolution. Because even men of God slept uneasily in medieval Europe. Confessors wrote about it, restless bishops who begged for sleep as a kind of penance, who muttered prayers under their breath until they passed out from exhaustion. Monks who refused beds altogether and slept in chapel aisles. Nuns who built crosses from their bedding and bound their hands at night to stop themselves from sinning in dreams. There's a name for that, you know. Nocturnal temptation, a sin of the mind, condemned, watched for, punished, and yet inevitable. Because no one, not even the most pious, could control what they dreamed about. Let's go now to a young woman's room, a noble daughter. Her bed is soft, stuffed with feathers, and draped with gauze thin as spider silk. She's been kept inside for months away from court, away from scandal. Not because of illness, but because of what she saw. She told her family she had a vision, an angel standing at the foot of her bed. Not glowing, not with wings, but staring, silently, for hours. She woke screaming, and again the next night, and the next. The bed was exorcised, sprinkled with holy water, dismantled, burned. She was moved to a new room. It didn't help, because the angel kept coming. The priests said it was hysteria. The physicians said it was indigestion. The servants whispered, maybe it wasn't an angel. Maybe it was her father. But no one asked again. And she was married off quietly 6 months later. The bed doesn't speak, but it remembers. Now down again into the city slums. You're inside a brothel, not a glamorous one. This isn't lace and wine and powdered wigs. This is medieval work, raw, dangerous, brutal. The room smells of sweat wax and cheap ale. The beds are little more than frames with ticking stuffed with wool and rags. Privacy is minimal dividers made of thin cloth shadows flickering from the firelight beyond. This is where women survive by renting themselves to men who have nowhere else to go, or who want to pretend for an hour that they are loved. The sheets are rarely cleaned. Diseases pass from body to body. The walls are thin. The moans next door are not always pleasure. Sometimes they're silence forced to sound like agreement. And the women who live here, they don't decorate. There's no room for softness. The beds are not theirs. They're rented like the rest of their bodies. And yet, even here sometimes, someone laughs. Someone hums a lullaby. Someone shares their crust of bread. And the bed for one night becomes a place of brief, fragile humanity. Now move through the streets toward the town square. Tonight, there's a hanging. And you're in the house of the executioner. Yes, he has a bed too. It's sturdy, low, stained. He sleeps with the knowledge of death. People hate him, yet need him. His wife lies beside him, pretending she doesn't smell the gallows on his skin. Their children sleep in the next room, unaware that their father's pillow is stuffed with the same straw used to bind wrists before the drop. His bed is quiet, always quiet. No one speaks of dreams in this house. And what of dreams? Let's stop for a moment. Because all this while you've seen beds from the outside, from the foot, the door, the ceiling beam. But what does it mean to sleep in them, to truly drift? In medieval dream theory, the soul left the body at night. It wandered, it met angels, it saw visions of the future. It visited the dead. Some believed dreams were divine messages. Others thought they were temptations sent by the devil. But all agreed dreams mattered. You were judged not only by your actions, but by what you saw in your sleep. A woman who dreamt of flames might be condemned. A man who dreamt of wolves might be forced to do penance. Dreams could be brought to the village priest like confessions, and some were written down in secret journals, on scraps of parchment tucked under pillows, like prayers or warnings. The dream of falling, the dream of blood, the dream of waking up and seeing someone else lying beside you. Someone who wasn't there when you fell asleep. And some people never woke up, not because they died, but because they weren't alone anymore. There are tales of dreamers who woke possessed, speaking foreign tongues, weeping with joy or dread, claiming to have seen the Virgin, or the devil, or both. And the bed was where it all happened, where it always happened. So tonight, as you lie still warm or cold, alone or not, remember the bed beneath you is a place of stories. Not just the ones you're told, but the ones that live in the threads, in the knots, in the parts of your soul that come loose when you dream. And maybe, just maybe, you've already been here before, just like they were. You're deeper into the night now, so deep that time begins to soften like wax melting down the side of a forgotten candle. You're not sure whether it's the 13th century or the 15th. You're not sure if the ceiling beams are those of a peasant's cottage or the vaulted arches of a monastic dormitory. What you do know is this: you're lying down, and the weight on your chest isn't just the covers, it's everything that has ever happened in a bed. Tonight the room smells of ash, dried sweat, and old pages. There's parchment on the floor. A candle burned itself out hours ago, wax pooled like spilled milk beside a heap of notes. You're in the bed of a scholar. Not the kind from fantasy stories, no towers, no glittering potions. Just a thin man with ink-stained fingers and a furrowed brow curled around a book he hasn't finished copying. His cot is narrow, stuffed with straw, and wrapped in linen too worn to be white. There are no women here, no children, just thoughts, and the faint hum of questions that won't leave him alone. Because even in the quietest bedrooms, the mind makes noise. He's been studying dream theory, not just as mysticism, but as science. Galen Hippocrates Avicenna, he's translated them all. He believes dreams are messages from the body, the stomach humors, the liver spirits, the balance of bile. He keeps a dream diary beside his bed, where he records every strange image that comes to him, to cats cut with human eyes, ladders to nowhere, mouths that speak from pillows. He doesn't fear these dreams. He wants them, because they mean he's still thinking even when the world goes dark, still learning even while unconscious. But not everyone saw dreaming as enlightenment. Across the street, a woman is being woken up for confession. She's not ill. She's suspected. Her husband reported her to the village priest after she began mumbling in her sleep. Strange things. Names he didn't recognize. Languages he couldn't place. Her eyes would flick open in the night, her body stiff, her breath fast. But she wouldn't be awake, not truly. She'd speak to people who weren't there. And when he asked her who they were, she only cried. So now the priest has come to examine the bed. He sprinkles holy water on the mattress, holds a crucifix over the pillow, and waits for a sign. A twitch, a word, a reaction. The room is silent. The priest writes in his ledger. Subject exhibits signs of possession during sleep. Proceed with caution. They leave her that night alone in bed, but not really alone. She'll never sleep the same way again. Let's move now to a different kind of bed entirely. One that moves with you. You're a pilgrim, a real one. Not on holiday, not on a path lined with gift shops and scenic views, but walking, aching, blistered on a 600-mile journey to Santiago or Rome or Jerusalem. You carry everything with you, and when night comes, you sleep wherever you can. In the stables of monasteries, in the dirt beside a shrine, on the floor of a crowded tavern, where strangers snore and drink and groan just feet away. Your bed. A sackcloth blanket and a spare tunic folded as a pillow. And yet, when you lie down, you feel something holy. The weight of the stars above you, the smell of wax and wet wool and open earth. You pray not because you're afraid, but because you're grateful. Grateful to sleep somewhere that doesn't judge you. But there are risks, too, because not every stranger shares a bed with kindness. There are stories of pilgrims robbed in the night, murdered for the pouch hidden beneath their head, of women assaulted, of men who fell asleep and woke without shoes, without food, without their teeth. The road is long, the beds are short, and danger is patient. And what of the innkeeper's bed? Let's open that door. It's the most used bed in town, rented by the hour. Not for sex, but for space. Travelers need rest. Soldiers need respite. It's rare for a stranger to have their own bed, so they share. 2 to a mattress. 4 if the night is cold. No introductions. No names. You crawl in beside someone who smells like smoke and steel. They grunt. You turn toward the wall. The bed creaks. The straw shifts. And by morning, they're gone. You may never know who they were. Sometimes a famous traveler might sleep in the bed. A bard, a nobleman, a priest on pilgrimage. And afterward, people would say, that bed knows history, as if it absorbed the stories through their backs. Maybe it did. Now let's visit the bed of a soldier, one who doesn't sleep at home. His bed is the corner of a muddy tent, a rolled blanket, a pile of cloaks, the sound of distant screams, the occasional moan of someone dying nearby. He wraps himself tightly, not for warmth, but to keep from hearing too much. Soldiers don't sleep soundly. They rest in snatches. Between watch shifts, during lulls, one eye open, always. Their dreams are different, not of demons or saints, but of home. Bread. The smell of clean straw. The touch of a familiar hand on their back. The weight of a child climbing into bed in the early morning asking for one more story. Those are the dreams that make them cry, not the ones of war. And when they return home, if they return, some never sleep in a bed again. They sleep in chairs, on floors, with windows open. They say it's the air, but it's not. It's the silence. They don't trust it. You shift now. The covers itch. Or maybe it's your thoughts. Because all these beds, all these nights, they begin to blur. And then there's the legend. It appears in many towns, with many variations, but always the same shape. A cursed bed. Sometimes it belonged to a man who murdered his wife. Sometimes it was crafted from the wood of a hanged man's gallows. Sometimes it was simply left behind when the last family fled the house. The story goes whoever sleeps in the bed will dream the same dream. A woman with black eyes, a whisper that grows louder with each night, a breath that is not your own. People laugh. They say it's a tale for children. But the bed, it's still there, in the corner of a forgotten room, in the attic of a locked manor, in the cellar of an abandoned inn. And every now and then someone climbs in just to see. And they don't laugh. They don't speak of what they saw. They just burn the sheets and move away. You don't know if the bed you're in now is one of those. You don't want to check. You don't want to lift the mattress or read the carvings in the headboard or see what's sewn into the seams. You just want to lie still and hope that the dreams you've collected from 1,000 medieval beds are just stories, aren't they? The room is quiet now, so quiet that you can hear the ticking of your own thoughts. The fire is long gone. The night is thick, and you've stopped wondering where or when you are. You're not in one bed anymore. You're in all of them. Every bed you've passed through clings to you. The straw in your hair, the scent of ash in your lungs, the press of wooden slats beneath your spine. You've learned by now that in medieval Europe the bed was never a comfort. It was a container. For bodies, for secrets, for shame. Tonight you're in a convent. The corridor is cold stone, bare. You walk past a row of wooden doors, each one leading to a nun's cell. Inside each is the same: a crucifix, a table, a single candle stub, and a bed no more than a bench with a folded cloak atop it. Pillows are forbidden. Softness discouraged. The body must never forget its sins. You step into one of these rooms careful not to disturb the silence. The bed is unoccupied, but the presence is overwhelming. A woman lives here still perhaps, and every inch of this tiny bed speaks of the discipline it took to sleep here. Some nuns slept sitting up. Some laid across boards nailed unevenly together. Others bound their arms before bed so they wouldn't touch themselves in sleep. The fear of bodily weakness was all-consuming. A popular manual advised sisters to sleep with one arm across the chest and the other laid flat so as not to be tempted by devilish dreams. And if dreams came anyway, more prayer, more fasting, more punishment. This was holiness through suffering, and the bed was where it began, every single night. Now move further into the monastery. This time the dormitory is filled. You see rows of monks, hooded, silent, wrapped in coarse wool. They sleep without privacy. No curtains, no partitions, no escape from the chorus of snoring and whispering. Sleep comes in short stretches between vigils and matins and the unending rhythm of bells. Even the timing of rest was spiritual. Monks were taught to fear too much sleep to keep their dreams clean by sheer force of will. If they failed, if they were caught dreaming sinfully or muttering in their sleep, they were woken and punished. Not with beatings, with denial. No sleep the next night, or the next. One chronicler wrote of a monk who hadn't dreamed for 12 years. He has achieved silence in the soul, it said. Even in sleep, his mind is white as paper. But what is purity if it's carved out by fear? Let's leave this sacred silence behind and walk into something far louder. A noblewoman's bed in midwinter. It's the feast of the Epiphany, and the castle is thick with celebration. Wine spills, musicians play, the fireplaces roar. And upstairs in her chamber, the lady of the house is not alone. Her ladies-in-waiting gather around her as she readies herself for bed, though the night is far from over. In the medieval aristocracy, the bedroom was a public space. Important guests might be received here. Gossips gathered, politics whispered, and in some cases spells were cast. Yes, noble women had their own form of witchcraft. Not cauldrons and curses, but linens and lace and murmured words stitched into embroidered pillows. A woman might sleep with a charm beneath her pillow to encourage pregnancy or to ward off her husband's mistress. More than one noble lady was caught with a love spell, hidden beneath her husband's side of the bed, pieces of his hair knotted with wax, blessed by a village seer. The goal was not to harm, just to bind, to make him sleep only in her bed. But if caught, it was treason. There are court records, women imprisoned, whipped, or sent to convents for trying to control their husbands through the bedroom. Even their dreams weren't their own. Now descend again. Not into poverty this time, but into madness. You're in a hospital, if you could call it that. A medieval ward for the mentally unwell was little more than a stone room with barred windows and straw-covered floors. Beds, if they existed, were nailed to the ground. Some were lined with chains. Others had leather straps hidden beneath the mattress. People slept in them for decades. There was no therapy, no understanding, only fear. Women who had visions were chained to their beds. Men who screamed in the night were gagged and tied down. No one asked what they were dreaming. They were assumed to be possessed. The bed became their cage, and once you were in it, you rarely left. Even physicians wrote of these people as sleeping with demons, as if the bed itself had turned against them. And yet, in secret, some of these same physicians experimented. They would alter beds, add stones beneath the mattress, remove pillows, change the direction of the frame to face east or west. They believed the orientation of the bed could influence dreams, could heal. They weren't entirely wrong. Sleep researchers today still speak of sleep hygiene, of the way space and posture and silence affect rest. But in medieval Europe, it was all trial and superstition. One doctor wrote, "Turn the bed of a madman and he will wake with a different voice." Now you're in a bedroom with no one in it. Not yet, anyway. The space has been prepared. Fresh rushes on the floor. clean linens on the bed, a bowl of warm water on the side table. This is the room where a condemned man will spend his last night. It's called the mercy chamber. In some prisons, those sentenced to death were given a final bed, a clean one, a priest to sit with them, a chance to confess. They slept if they could. Most didn't. The bed was soft. That was the point. It was meant to be cruel, to show the prisoner what comfort felt like one last time, to remind them what they were about to lose. In one case, a man wept not during his confession, not during the march to the gallows, but as he touched the pillow. "I've never had one," he said. He died the next morning. The pillow was used again the next night. Now return just for a moment to something gentler, a midwife's bed. Yes, they had them, though rarely their own. A midwife's bed was carried in her hands, swaddling cloths, clean linen, and a blanket meant to be laid on the floor beside the birthing bed of another woman. She would work all night, then curl in that space to sleep. Sometimes she'd sleep beside the mother, sometimes beside the child. There are letters from midwives who describe dreams shared with newborns. The infant curled beside them, twitching in tandem, breathing in rhythm. They called it spirit linking. Maybe it was just sleep. Maybe it was something else. But it was in a bed, always the bed, where lives began and ended, where joy and cruelty lay skin to skin, where one pillow might hold a prayer and the next a curse. You are in that world now, half asleep, half aware, floating between feather beds and flea-ridden cots, between candles and crucifixes, between moans and murmured lullabies. And the bed beneath you, it isn't medieval, but it remembers. The walls are thin, or maybe they've vanished entirely. You're not sure whether the shapes you see in the dark are furniture or memories. You don't move. You don't need to. The story is moving for you, drifting like smoke from chamber to chamber, carrying you deeper into a world where beds are never just for sleeping. Tonight you find yourself in a tavern attic. You wouldn't have chosen this room, it wasn't offered exactly. You had to ask, had to slip a few extra coins to the tired-eyed innkeeper who led you up crooked stairs and pointed to a mattress laid on floorboards warped from rain. The room smells of dust and old wood. There's no hearth, only breath-warmed air and a tiny window you won't dare open. Too many birds nest in the thatch. And the bed. A collapsed frame and a ticking stuffed with barley husks, not straw. Straw was reserved for those sleeping downstairs. You were given what's left, and yet even here you find the markings. Scratched into the wood of the bedpost is a crude symbol, a cross encircled, a charm, or a warning. These symbols appear everywhere in medieval Europe, carved into beds, headboards, beams above pillows. Protection marks meant to ward off witches, demons, or the night hag, a malevolent spirit said to sit on your chest and steal your breath. People believed she was real, and who could blame them? They woke paralyzed, couldn't speak, couldn't move. A weight on their ribs, a shadow at the foot of the bed. No explanation, no relief. You know it today as sleep paralysis. They knew it as a visitation. To sleep in their minds was to leave your body unguarded, and anything could slip in. Now rise quietly and follow the stairs down into the inn's main hall. It's late and most guests are asleep. But in the back room, past the barrels and the bread ovens, there's another bed. This one belongs to the innkeeper's daughter. She's 12. She's small. And she's listening. Through the cracks in the wall, she hears everything. The boots climbing the stairs, the laughter, the creak of her father's bed as he collapses into it after a night of drink, the weeping of the woman rented to a stranger. She doesn't speak of it, but she knows. And each night before sleep, she kneels beside her cot and whispers the same words. Let me wake, let me not see what they see. Let me be passed over. This is her prayer, not for blessings, just for forgetting, because some beds remember too much. Move with me now to the castle of a foreign bride. She's new here, brought overland by caravans sealed by marriage to a man she barely knows, to a people who speak a language she doesn't understand. Her new bed is large but not warm. The servants avoid her eyes. The guards avoid her presence. Even her husband, the Duke, only visits when he must. So she makes the bed her own. She fills it with things from home linens embroidered with her mother's sigil. A little pillow stuffed with herbs, native to her childhood forest. A wooden comb she hides under the pillow, believing it holds luck. She spends long hours in that bed, staring at the canopy, imagining her sisters, imagining son. Sometimes she dreams of returning. Sometimes she dreams of being buried beneath this very mattress. In time, she will give birth in this bed, bleed in this bed, be crowned duchess in this bed, and eventually die in this bed. It will all happen here, without ever truly belonging to her. Now step into a more crowded chamber, the servants' dormitory. There are 5 beds, but 8 people. No one sleeps alone. Some sleep head to foot. Some share blankets. Some curl in corners. They don't complain. This is better than the floor, better than the barn. They keep their shoes beside them in the bed so they won't be stolen. They sleep with their belts on their cloaks tucked tight, always ready to rise at the first bell. And still some find space for tenderness. There's a boy here who tucks his arm under the head of the old cook so her bones don't grind against the wood. There's a girl who sings softly to the one with nightmares, though no one dares call it kindness. This isn't a family, but the bed, for a moment, makes it feel like one. There are darker stories, of course. Beds used as prisons, not just in towers or dungeons, but inside homes. You see, not all captivity comes with chains. In some households, daughters were locked in their chambers for protection. Windows boarded, bedposts nailed to the floor. The bed became their cage. They were told it was for their virtue, that the outside world was dangerous, that this room, this small square of wood and cloth, was safety. But they knew better. There are poems scratched into the underside of one such bed, lines of sorrow, of boredom, of longing. A list of names, a prayer for the sky. No one ever read them, until now. And finally you come to a room that doesn't belong to anyone at all. A guest room in a manor that's been empty for years. The bed is still made, perfectly, as if someone might return. But the dust says otherwise. The embroidered headboard is stiff with age. The mattress has collapsed in the middle, forming a cradle for invisible memories. And yet, the room feels full. You can almost hear footsteps pacing across the wooden floor, the rustle of skirts, the creak of a drawer, a sigh. Some say that old beds collect pieces of their owners, that dreams, when strong enough, leave behind a trace, a a shadow that curls beneath the covers and waits for someone new to arrive. Not to haunt, but to remember. So now you lie back, close your eyes, and listen to what the bed might be trying to tell you. Because in this world, nothing speaks louder than silence. And no silence is deeper than the one that lives between worn sheets beneath woolen blankets inside the frame of a bed that's seen too much. The medieval bed is never empty, even when you're the only one in it. The air is still, but it isn't quiet. You're lying in a bed that isn't yours, in a time that isn't yours, and yet it all feels familiar now. The creaking timbers, the distant toll of a bell, the hush that follows a breath held too long. You've been in many rooms, walked through centuries of beds, and they've all led you here, wherever here is. But tonight, we linger, not in a new place, but in a feeling, the weight of ritual. Because in medieval Europe, everything about the bedroom had layers. Nothing was simple, especially not sleep. Let's start with the way you go to bed. Not just climbing under a blanket, but preparing. Every night was a spiritual act, a social statement, and a superstitious hedge against whatever might find you in the dark. Even the way you undressed mattered. Clothing was removed in a particular order, outer garments first, then layers of linen. And then you had to choose what to sleep in. For some it was nothing. For others it was a shift, a nightgown, a tunic never meant for sunlight. Your night things weren't just for modesty. They were protection against drafts, against insects, against temptation. In some houses, people wouldn't even sleep barefoot. They kept on stockings or wrapped cloth around their feet. Rats were common. So were cold floors, and spirits, it was said, could enter through your souls if you left them exposed. The ritual continued with prayers, always prayers. You recited them while sitting on the edge of the bed, while kneeling beside it, while standing with your back to it, whispering words like armor against bad dreams. A favorite, the Anima Christi. Another, from the snares of the devil, deliver me, O Lord. Some added charms, crosses tucked under pillows, hands folded over the heart, eyes turned toward the heavens or the beams in the ceiling, where shadows liked to settle. Even the wealthy followed the rites. Queen Anne of Bohemia, wife to Richard II, had her servants recite psalms beside her bed each night. Not for show, for protection. It was believed that Satan preferred to visit women at night, especially noble ones who might pass on his whispered lies to their husbands by morning. She never slept in a bed without a crucifix near the pillow. Now look beside the bed. Do you see it? A small table, a bowl, a cloth. This is the medieval version of evening hygiene. Washing before bed was expected if you had water. Hands, face, feet. Not for vanity, but because uncleanliness invited demons. There are stories of children who forgot to rinse their fingers before bed and woke with boils. Or so the priests said. Cleanliness wasn't just for health, it was for the soul. But that water, it couldn't be left out overnight. Why? Because standing water could invite spirits. It sounds strange, doesn't it? But people truly believed that a basin of untouched water might serve as a mirror or a doorway, a reflective surface that let something through. So the water was discarded, or covered with a cloth, or in the case of some superstitious households, salted. Salt warded off evil after all. A pinch in the corners of the room, a circle around the bed. Better safe than sorry. Now come closer. Look at the bed itself. There's a particular practice happening here, subtle but powerful, the turning of the mattress. It was done before great events, before childbirth, before departure, before funerals. The mattress was lifted and flipped, a symbol of change. Sometimes it was just to air it out. Sometimes it was spiritual. The idea that by turning the bed, you turned fate. You started fresh. You reversed something. In some places, the midwife would turn the bed 3 times during a difficult labor. In others, a sick person's mattress would be rotated every morning to keep death from settling too deep into the ticking. Superstition, maybe. But when death visits beds as often as it did in the Middle Ages, you start to hedge your bets. Now look again at the bedding. Do you see that little strip of cloth at the foot of the bed? The one embroidered with initials. That's a death cloth. Not everyone had one. But in many homes, there was a strip of fabric, usually linen, sometimes silk, kept under the bed or sewn into the lining. It was meant to be pulled up over the face of the dead when their time came. Because in the Middle Ages, no one ever knew when a night might be your last. The idea was to die with dignity, covered, eyes closed, a body wrapped like a promise. And when someone did die in a bed, the room changed. Mirrors were covered. The bed was stripped. The mattress might be moved to the floor. And the bed itself sometimes burned, sometimes given away, but often simply reused. Beds witnessed death regularly, but that didn't make them any less personal. If you wanted to insult someone, truly insult them, you didn't curse their name. You cursed their bed. You'll die on borrowed linen. No honest man has laid in your sheets. Even your bedspreads weep. These were fighting words, because to shame a person's bed was to shame their life. Now let's talk about intimacy. You've seen the fear, the punishment, the ritual. But what about love? Yes, it happened, even in the shadows. There are letters, dozens, written in cramped hands, passed by servants, hidden under pillows. My arms recall you still. I pressed my face to the pillow where your head had lain. You did not speak last night, but I heard you dreaming. Lovers, secret or sanctioned, used beds as message boards. They sewed initials into sheets, braided strands of hair into mattress seams, whispered to the space where their beloved had been. One night away on campaign, sent his wife a package of dried rose petals. Scatter them on the bed, he wrote, so that when you lie down, you do not feel alone. She wrote back, I do not scatter them. I sleep with them in my hands. You weren't expecting this softness, were you? But it's always been there, even in the darkest corners, even beneath the dirtiest sheets, a hand reaching out in the dark, a head nestled into another's shoulder, 2 people breathing in rhythm in a world that didn't want them to touch, and the bed. The bed held them, quietly, without judgment. Because the bed remembers everything, not just the horror, but the moments when someone sang a lullaby, when someone lit a candle for hope, when someone forgave themselves at last, lying in the dark. And maybe, just maybe tonight, you'll do the same. It's the hour before dawn now, the one the monks called lauds, when the night has stretched as far as it can without snapping. You're not sure when you stopped caring about where you are or whose bed you're in. It doesn't matter anymore. Every bed is the same now.